TitleMatchNetwork.com.
Today we're joined by a true legend in the sport of professional wrestling, the king of wrestling, Jerry Lawler. You've wrestled everyone from like A to Z, and in my opinion, probably one of the best talkers in the business. And you started up almost everybody in the business, went through Memphis territory, and you're responsible for a lot of the guys in the business today making it to the top. And I guess before we get into today's version of Jerry Lawler, I want to talk about how you got started in the business.
I have to try to think back now how many years ago. It's, I guess, nearly going on 30 years ago. I was a wrestling fan to start off with. I think the first time I can remember actually seeing wrestling on television, my family lived. Of course, I was born and raised most of my life in Memphis, Tennessee. My father worked in Memphis at a big Ford Motor Company assembly plant. And I think in about 1958 or something like that, they had a problem with the city. The Ford Motor Company had a problem with the city. And so they shut this assembly plant down that my father worked at. And they built another plant in Lorain, Ohio, and which was like 800 miles from Memphis. And they gave everybody that worked at the plant in Memphis the opportunity to transfer to Ohio and keep their jobs. And so our family wound up packing up and moving up to the shores of Lake Erie, about 30 miles west of Cleveland. And we moved there right in the middle of winter. The Lake Erie, I will never forget, Lake Erie was frozen over, and there were several hundred families moving into this little area because of this new plant opening up. And so there was a very big housing shortage. So we had to move into a little lakefront cottage that was actually usually only in the summertime ordinarily for people that wanted to rent these little cottages and be right on the shores of Lake Erie. And we moved there in something like February of '58, and the whole lake was frozen over, and the wind was coming in, and these little cottages didn't even have heaters because they were ordinarily just used in the summertime. So we moved right into there, and it was like quite a culture shock coming from Memphis. But that was the first time that I remember seeing wrestling on television. I'm sure we had wrestling on television in Memphis before that, but I don't recall ever seeing it. But when we moved to Ohio, I saw a wrestling show there that featured the Sheik, Bobo Brazil, John and Chris Tolis, and all of these, and Johnny Powers, some guys from the Cleveland and Detroit area. And so that's where I really first started to watch wrestling on television and enjoyed it. And my father was a big wrestling fan also. We wound up living in Cleveland for about 7 years, and a lot of people wonder why a lot of people that know me today know that I have been a big Cleveland sports fan all my life, and that's really the reason. We moved from Memphis, where they had no professional sports teams at the time, to just like I said, 30 miles away from Cleveland. And there were, of course, the Cleveland Indians and the Cleveland Browns, and I got my first opportunity to go to a professional baseball game or professional football games. And this was the time when Jim Brown was playing, and the Cleveland Browns were winning championships. And then when we moved back to Memphis, there were still no pro sports teams there. So I remained a Cleveland Browns and Cleveland Indians fan my whole life, really, and still am to this day. And fortunately, through wrestling, I've gotten the opportunity to meet a lot of the players and a lot of the owners and that sort of thing. So it's been a neat sort of love affair with the Cleveland sports scene. But as I said, we stayed there for about 7, almost 8 years in Ohio. And then my father had a heart attack and a heart condition, so we wound up disabled to work from there, and we moved back to Memphis. And then when we came back to Memphis, I was just in high school, and I remember that's the first time I remember seeing wrestling on Memphis television. And it, of course, was on Channel 13, and there was Lance Russell and Dave Brown doing the commentary, and of course all different wrestlers. And I guess that was the first time I realized that wrestling was regionalized, so to speak, because I would talk to the other kids about the wrestlers that I'd seen in Ohio, like the Sheik and Bobo Brazil and these guys, and the people in Memphis had never heard of them because it was just the television at that time was regionalized. They knew people like Jackie Fargo and Tojo Yamamoto and Don and Al Green and the Von Brauners and the guys that were the local, I guess the regional stars there in the Memphis area. So I of course got into watching the wrestling there every Saturday morning in Memphis, and Memphis was unique in the fact that at that time they had a live wrestling show every Monday night in Memphis at a downtown auditorium called Ellis Auditorium. And so my father, as I said, was disabled and didn't work, and I was in high school and just had like a learner's permit to drive. So every Monday night I would drive my dad, and he and I would go down to the wrestling matches there in Memphis, and that was my first actually seeing a live event, and I was like hooked then. I was just like I was a big fan, and I remember, I don't know why, but I guess they were just more, at least to me, seemed like more charismatic or more risk taking. But I was, as a lot of people are, I was a fan of the bad guys. I was a big the top heel team at the time was a team called the Blue Infernos, and I learned later that they consisted of a guy named Frank Martinez, a couple of Mexican wrestlers, Frank Martinez, and the other guy escapes me, except that he still wrestles now to this day. Oh gosh, it'll come to me later. But anyway, these guys flying all over the ring, and I just, for some reason, I thought, I guess maybe the mystery of the mask. And this was back in the era that mask guys, it was really neat because nobody really knew their identity. There wasn't an internet where everybody would find out all of the scoops about everybody. These mask guys were really mysterious, and I remember, would, like, after the matches or whatever, hang out and try to see these guys without their mask or coming into the auditoriums and that sort of thing. But anyway, then I guess like a lot of people do these days, I guess now they actually call them something, backyard federations or whatever, that sort of thing. But at that time, we lived in Memphis there, where I had a brother that was that's 4 years older than me. And then next door to my brother and I, or next door to our house, there were a group of boys called the Mike, Danny, David, Dickie Mashburn, 4 brothers. And so we all, there were like 6 of us there, and we all wrestled around. And Mike and I especially, we wound up really imitating everything that we saw on television and saw these wrestlers do. And, right in the backyard, body slamming each other on the ground and this sort of thing. And we just thought it was neat. We just enjoyed the wrestling and enjoyed emulating the guys that we saw and trying to do everything that we saw them do on television. But the way that I finally got to actually meet a professional wrestler for the first time was through my artwork. And a lot of people may or may not know that I do artwork and have been able to draw ever since I can remember. And one of the things I started doing at the matches, I would draw these cartoons or caricatures of the wrestlers, and spend a lot of my time, actually too much time, when I should have been doing schoolwork. I would be drawing wrestlers and that sort of thing. And I took some of the drawings to the matches on Monday night and let the other fans around there see my little caricatures. And maybe I'd draw Jackie Fargo body slamming Tojo Yamamoto right through the ring, and coming out the bottom of the floor of the ring and that sort of stuff. And there was an old man and lady that, of course, long since passed away now, but they just were really nice. And they the man, for some reason, I had never even thought of it. The man said, "You ought to send some of those drawings to Lance Russell over at Channel 13 and see what they think about it." So I thought, well, it couldn't hurt anything. So I did that. The following week, I put together 6 or 7 little drawings of what had taken place at the matches in Memphis the previous week. Sent them to Channel 13. Attention, Lance Russell. I don't even know what I expected. I didn't necessarily expect to hear from anybody on the thing. But the following Saturday morning, I turned on the television, 11 o'clock, sit down to watch the show, and I looked, and I could see, as Lance and Dave came on the screen, they're talking about who was going to wrestle that day. I could see on the corner of his desk, I could see my pictures were sitting there, my drawings. And I went, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. My drawings are on the desk. They're going to show my drawings. And sure enough, about 30 minutes into the show, they always had a segment where they would recap the action that had taken place the previous Monday and then talk about the upcoming matches for this coming Monday. And Lance just out of the blue said, he said, we're going to tell you about what went on down at the auditorium this past week. And as a matter of fact, we have some drawings here from a young man named Jerry Lawler that we're going to show you as we talk about the action. And
Wow.
he would talk about the match, and while he did, he held up my drawings, and they were like full screen on the thing. And I'm just sitting there going, wow, this was like the neatest thing that had ever happened to me, So I thought this was great, but then the really great thing was after the show was over, I'm telling my mom, "God, they showed my pictures on the wrestling." I'm calling my next door neighbor and that sort of thing. And then while I was floating around on cloud nine, my telephone rang, and answered the phone, and the voice was unmistakable. This deep voice. Is Jerry Lawler? I said, yeah. He says, Jerry, this is Lance Russell. And I went, oh my gosh, I can't believe Lance Russell called me on the phone. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, we really enjoyed your drawings, and everybody really liked the drawings, and we were just wondering if you wanted to, maybe next week you could send us some more drawings, or this week, and we would use those to illustrate what went on at the matches. And of course, I thought this was great. And so I sent more drawings in the next week. Sure enough, they showed them again. Following week, they showed them again. And after about, I think, 3 or 4 weeks, Lance called me up again. And this was unbelievable. He called me again and said, everybody just really is enjoying your drawings. And we thought we'd invite you to come over and actually be on TV with us and sit there at the desk and you hold up your drawings and let the people see who's actually doing these illustrations. So, of course, this was like a dream come true. I'm going to get to go and actually be on the wrestling show. So, sure enough, that was my first opportunity to be on a wrestling show. But while I was there, I got to meet, Lance took me around and introduced me to a lot of the wrestlers. And one of the guys, of course, he was everybody's hero in Memphis. He was the big star, was the fabulous Jackie Fargo. And Jackie was like, I idolized Jackie Fargo, and to get to actually meet him and shake hands with him was just the neatest thing in the world. And then what was even cooler was Jackie liked the artwork and the caricatures that I had done of him, and Jackie was into a phase of his career where he was, of course, using his wrestling popularity to sort of branch off into other directions, and he and a sort of a local country music star named Eddie Bond had opened a nightclub in Memphis called the Southern Frontier. And so Jackie asked me if I would be able to come down to their nightclub and paint like little cartoon caricatures of Jackie and Eddie Bond. I thought at first he meant maybe just paint 1 or 2, and finally I found out Jackie really liked looking at these little pictures of himself, because I bet I painted 100 pictures of Jackie and Eddie all over this nightclub. And so it took me literally, it was a work in progress that lasted like for months.
How old were you around this time?
Oh gosh, let's see. I was 17, maybe. I guess, yeah, 17. And so so anyway, after I'm doing all of this drawing and artwork, I finally finished up all of these caricatures, and I think Jackie was looking at this as and Eddie Bond also. These guys were great, not only great self promoters, but they were great. They always had some kind of angle to try to make a quick buck here or there, and so they both came up with the idea. They said, why don't we start up a little sign company? They said, we'll use our name, and you do the artwork, and we'll call it Bond Fargo Sign Company. And of course, this was before you get your trucks or whatever and all the signs done on computer. This is back when people still hand lettered the sides of trucks and signs on windows and that sort of thing. So basically, we started up a little sign company, and all of a sudden, I'm working for Jackie Fargo and Eddie Bond, and I'm going to school. I just graduated high school, and because of my artwork, I was fortunate enough to win a commercial art scholarship to University of Memphis. So I'm going to, at that time it's called Memphis State. I'm going to Memphis State in the morning, and in the afternoon I come up and paint signs for Jackie Fargo and Eddie Bond. And it gave me an opportunity to kind of be around Jackie Fargo a little bit, and I was really just fascinated with what I saw. It was like, to me, like the neatest lifestyle ever. Here's a guy that's on television on Saturday mornings. He goes down on Monday nights, and a huge crowd, falling all over him when he wrestles, and then he has all these fans, and of course a lot of pretty women following him around up at the nightclub. And I just thought, man, this has got to be the greatest life ever. And so we wound up having me work in a little office that was right next door to the Southern Frontier nightclub, and I'm down there painting, and I was really enjoying being around Jackie Fargo and Eddie Bond. But what I really, of course, had stars in my eyes about was wrestling. And I wasn't big or anything like that, but I did. When I realized this was something I wanted to do, I enrolled in the wrestling. I started wrestling at Memphis State, and at that time, for some reason, wrestling was big out west, but in the South, or Memphis, especially at Memphis State, just the collegiate wrestling hadn't really caught on. It just wasn't that big, and they didn't have much of a program. Matter of fact, the whole student body, we had 5 guys turn out for wrestling, and the baseball coach doubled as the wrestling coach, and of course we just took a back seat to baseball, and they didn't even have enough guys to like field a competitive team and compete against the other universities. So, but we did get a basic amateur wrestling background while I was there. And I'm thinking in my mind, one of these days I'll get the nerve to tell Jackie Fargo that I'm wrestling here at college, and I would love to try to wrestle for the Memphis organization. But of course I just didn't really have the nerve to do that at that time. So anyway, one day I'm doing my little artwork, painting some signs there, and knock on the door, and this young guy comes in, not much older than me, maybe 22 or 23 years old. And his name was Jerry Vickers, and he was from Missouri, and walked in and introduced himself, and said he's looking for Jackie Fargo. And I said, well, of course he's not here right now. Jackie doesn't get here usually about 7 or 8 at night. And but I said, this is the club, and I said, what do you want with him? And he said, well, I'm just in from Missouri, and I've wrestled a little bit, and I just wanted to talk to him about wrestling here in Memphis. I wanted to find out who you talk to, and who you have to know to get booked. And so I thought, here was my fountain of information. Here's a guy. And I wasn't intimidated by this guy at all, because, like I said, he didn't look much older than me. And I said, well, you know what? I said, I've been wondering the same thing. I said, I've been working here for Jackie, and I want to wrestle really bad. And I was wondering how you go about breaking into the business. How would you ever have your first match, or get somebody to look at you and see you wrestle? And so I still to this day think that this was just an opportunity for this guy to make a few bucks off of me, because he didn't know me from Adam, and could care less probably about helping me. But he said, well, of course, the first thing you have to do is you have to have wrestling tights and wrestling boots. He said, do you have any of that? Of course, I didn't know where you would even get such a thing. I said, no, I don't. And he said, well, you know what? He said, I got a pair of boots that I can sell you, a couple of pairs of trunks. And I thought, wow, this is great. So I said, well, yeah, I'd be glad to buy them, And he said, okay. And so he goes out to his car, comes back in. He's got a pair of wrestling boots that were about a size too big for me. But anyway, this was like somebody offered me, a buried treasure or something. I thought, this is the greatest thing ever. So I bought the wrestling boots and the trunks from this guy, and I thought, man, now I'm almost there. I'm on my way to being a professional wrestler. And then, though, he told me, he said, well, what you could, of course, you got to have your first match somewhere. And he said, it's probably going to be really tough to get your first match working for this Memphis organization, which at that time, the owners of the territory were Nick Goulas and Roy Welch. And they had promoted wrestling in Memphis for probably about 30 years or so. And he said, but there's a little organization over across the bridge in West Memphis, Arkansas, that just has little small matches on Saturday night, and they have them in this little place called the Avon Theater, which was a little rundown movie theater that had gone out of business, and this wrestling promoter guy was renting it, and he had taken out like the first 10 rows of seat and set a wrestling ring down right in front of the movie screen. And I'll never forget the first time I went over there. That ring was sitting down there, and of course all the seats were kind of dilapidated. And over the ring for a ring light, this big wire was hanging down, and there was this big galvanized wash tub upside down with about 6 or 7 light bulbs inside it, and that was his ring light. But anyway, Jerry Vickers said, you might go across there with me. He said, I'm going to wrestle over there for this guy Saturday night. He said, I'll take you over there, and he said, the only thing you got to do is, he said, don't tell him you've never wrestled before. Just if he asks you if you've wrestled, just say, yeah, you wrestled in Florida or something like that. So anyway, I said, okay, that'll be great. But between that time and that Saturday, I went over, and Jerry Vickers was actually staying with a professional wrestler that lived there in Memphis that he knew. I went over, and we went out in his backyard, and Jerry showed me a few things, and so he said, tomorrow we're going to go over and meet the West Memphis promoter. The guy's name was Aubrey Griffith. So I got a little bit ahead of myself here. In the meantime, one of the other things that Jackie Fargo and Eddie Bond did there in Memphis was they had the nightclub. Eddie was a country music singer. Jackie was a wrestler. And then Eddie was also the program director at a little sort of rinky-dink country music station there called KWAM. And it didn't get out very far, but as I said, they played country music. And Eddie Bond did the morning show on there, and Jackie Fargo had an afternoon slot where he was on the radio just as a personality from like 3 to 5. And after I'd been working for those guys for a few months, they actually well, of course, I knew about them being on the radio, so I was taking wrestling at University of Memphis, and then I also took another course in broadcasting because I was thinking, one of these days I'll tell these, if I can't get in wrestling, maybe I can help use these guys to get me in radio. And so, sure enough, after a while, I told Eddie Bond that I was doing the radio stuff, so they gave me a little shift on at night. I was actually on from like 7 to midnight. It was a time when nobody listened and nobody wanted to work. So they put me in the studio, which was a little Quonset hut over in a really bad part of town. And it was just, like I said, a really rinky-dink radio station. But anyway, we were going to go and meet the West Memphis wrestling promoter the next day. And so I got up all excited. Jerry Vickers called me. I met him. We go over, and sure enough, we walk in. That was my first time to see this little movie theater. And I'll never forget meeting Aubrey Griffith. And I think I had remembered seeing him wrestle a time or two for the Memphis organization, but he was older now and was running this little operation in eastern Arkansas. So Jerry Vickers already knew this guy. And as he said, he was going to wrestle for him this coming Saturday night. Jerry said, Aubrey, I brought a young man with me here from Memphis, and he's interested in wrestling over here in West Memphis. And sure enough, the very first words out of Aubrey's mouth were, he said, well, have you ever wrestled before, son? And I said, yes, sir. And I felt like my face was like a neon sign. I felt like I'm lying. But he said, and I think he knew it, because then the next words he said, yeah, where'd you wrestle? And I said, down in Florida, which was the 2 answers that Jerry Vickers had given me. Unfortunately, he didn't give me any other answers further than that. And the next question out of Aubrey Griffith's mouth was, what promoter did you wrestle for down there? And I said, I can't remember. And of course, Jerry Vickers gives me the nudge and says, Eddie Graham, wasn't it Eddie Graham? And I said, yeah, Eddie Graham. And of course, the guy knew I was lying right then. And so he said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, I don't have any openings right now, but, leave me your number, and if something comes up, I'll call you. And so I knew, I'd blown my big chance right there. And so I wasn't even thinking about saying this when I went in there, but just all of a sudden I blurted out, well, I just thought that if I was wrestling over here for you, I could talk about it on my radio show every night on KWAM radio. And then all of a sudden, this guy's eyes lit up. And he said, you're on the radio? I said, oh, yeah, I do a show every night from 7 to midnight on KWAM radio. Country music. A lot of wrestling fans listen. I said, he said, well, all right. And you could talk about our matches here in West Memphis on your show if you were wrestling. I said, sure. So he said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, I'll put you and Jerry in a tag match this Saturday night. And so, bang, I was in. I couldn't believe it. We left there, and Jerry Vickers was telling me, that was great, man. What a great idea. He said, can you really talk about it on the radio? I said, sure. So, sure enough, I started, that night, man, I started blowing it out. I'm telling everybody, between every record, oh, there's huge, great wrestling action coming to West Memphis, Arkansas. And I went and got sound effects of the bell ringing and the roaring crowd, and I made it to hear me talk about it, it sounded like it was going to be Madison Square Garden. Of course, it's West Memphis. And so plugged it all week long, all excited, got over there to the Avon Theater. And of course, I had never really, I never really knew. Nobody had ever really sat down and told me what wrestling was like. The only inkling that I had, was one time when I was going to the wrestling matches at Ellis Auditorium. One of the guys that worked concessions there once told me, and I was the biggest wrestling fan ever. I'm one of these guys. I thought they were in there killing each other, but somehow I knew surely they weren't really killing each other or they would be dead. And one day, one of the concession guys told me, he said, you know what? He said, these guys actually go downstairs to the auditorium here and talk these matches over. I said, get out. He said, they really do. I said, no way. He said, you want me to show you? I said, yeah. So, it's like right before the matches are going to start. And he said, come with me. We go back through the back of the concession area, down some steps. Be quiet. Open up a little door. Sure enough, there's a big room. And there's the two wrestlers that are going to wrestle against each other on the first match. And they're sitting there talking to each other. Of course, we were ways away, but I could see them sitting there talking. And I said, wow, pretty cool. So that was really basically the only true knowledge that I had about wrestling. I never told this Jerry Vickers guy that I wasn't smart or that I was smart or anything. It just didn't really come up. I guess he just assumed that because I was working for Jackie Fargo that I was. So we were wrestling the big stars in Memphis at that time were a team called the Interns, managed by Dr. Ken Ramey. And that's like, what was that name? Star and Jim Star and can't remember the other guy's name now. But anyway, they were the big stars in Memphis. And in West Memphis, they had a sort of little rip-off tag team called the Executioners that had little white outfits and everything. And they were a couple of pretty big burly guys, of course, not anywhere near the caliber of the real Interns. And so that's who they had Jerry Vickers' eye against. And sure enough, the promoter, Aubrey Griffith, comes in and says to Jerry and I, we got to go in, and I'm just looking around, and I see all the wrestlers, and I'll never forget, we were dressing behind, in a little room behind the movie screen. And I don't know if anybody's ever been behind a movie screen, but it's really cool. It's all perforated. And it's one of those deals where when you were on that side, you could look out and see out there, but the people inside couldn't see you. And I'm thinking, wow, I wonder if they can see us like we see them. Here's guys sitting there naked. Here's guys talking about their match and all that kind of stuff. And, you look out there and you could see the people out. Obviously, they couldn't see us. But that's when the promoter came over and he got Jerry and I together with these guys that we were going to wrestle. And, I'm soaking it all in, but I didn't want to let anybody know that this was like my losing my virginity as far as wrestling goes. But that's what was happening. And, he said, yeah, I want you guys to go out there and have a good match. And, after about 15 or 20 minutes, one of the Executioners will take the fall on Jerry Vickers. So I'm going,
Wow.
These guys really were talking about the match down there in the auditorium, right? So the match didn't go exactly as I had planned or hoped, because I wanted to try a move that I had seen the Blue Infernos do over in Memphis, well, actually, the Blue Infernos did it to a wrestler that, and the only reason I remember his name is because of this particular move that I tried to emulate. They were wrestling some young guy that was named Young Anaya, and somewhere in the match, they just grabbed this kid. They'd been beating on him a little bit. They just grabbed him by the seat of his tights and by his hair and just ran him across the ring and threw him between the top rope and the second rope. And that's a move I'd seen done a million times, but every time I'd ever seen somebody get thrown through the ropes, they somehow grabbed the ropes, hooked the ropes, broke their fall and tumbled out onto the floor. And, that was fine. But this particular guy, this young Anaya, somehow when they grabbed him and they shot him through, he would go sailing through the ropes just like a rocket and not touch anything. I mean, he would obviously put his hands to his side and just sail right through there and all the way out onto the floor and land in some kind of tumbling way, and of course not kill himself, but it just really looked great. And so I thought, man, that's what I want to do. I love that move. I want to have one of these guys throw me through the ropes. I'm going to sail out there. Everybody's going to go, oh, wow. So anyway, we'd been wrestling for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and Jerry Vickers tags me in. And just as soon as I got in there, I locked up with the guy. I had no idea how to call a match or anything. I locked up with this executioner, and I said, throw me out of the ring. So he grabs me by the hair, just like young Anaya, runs me across the ring. Here I go, man. I got my hands to the side. I'm sailing out head first. And the next thing I can remember is I'm back behind the movie screen again, back in the dressing room, and I'm laying out like this, and these guys are fanning me right with some towels. I'm like, and they said, "You all right? You all right?" And I'm going, "Huh?" And I'm like coming to, I'm regaining consciousness, and I said, "Yeah." The last thing I remember was hearing a big loud noise. And they said, yeah, that big loud noise was your head hitting the concrete floor when you sailed out of the ring. And so that was my very first match. And it lasted, like I said, about 4 minutes. And I got knocked out like a light because I had no clue of what I was doing. But it was like, to me, the greatest moment of my life. And I went back the next Saturday and the next Saturday, and we wrestled several weeks there. And every week on the radio, I would plug these matches even more and more. And I think the first week I wrestled there, they had like 23 people. And the crowd started coming up. The next week we had like 30 people. And then the fourth week it was up to like 45 people. And everybody was getting all excited. And I think finally, after about the fifth week, we finally broke like 100 people in the crowd. It was just, oh, this is great. And so they all attributed it to the extra plugs on the radio.
TitleMatchNetwork.com